Hi there, I'm Andrew, and welcome to Deconstructing Directing, an online resource library and paradigm for theater directors, especially those who don't have the time, money, or desire to participate in college or graduate training programs in theater and are working in upstream environments. I call those of us that work in community and educational theater spaces upstream theater directors because these environments are where most folks discover theater. The vast majority of theater artists get their start in a community or educational theater space before heading downstream to professional and regional theater and, of course, Broadway. Often we think of theater as a hierarchy, with Broadway at the top and community theater at the bottom. But this hierarchical image implies status, that the things at the top are more important than the things at the bottom. So I prefer the image of a river, because no part of the river is more or less important than another. And just like things in the theater ecosystem, things that happen to one part of a river affect every other part of it. There are a lot of important changes being talked about, and to a lesser degree implemented in the theater world these days. But most of what we hear about in the news and online is coming from downstream spaces like Broadway. But if we're serious about transforming the entire industry, we have to fight for change in the entire river, not just downstream. This resource library is my offering to that fight for necessary change. I suppose I should tell you a little about me. I have a distinct memory of being bitten by the theater bug at age 5, though my mom will say it was even earlier. At the time of recording this, I've been acting for almost 30 years and directing and teaching for nearly 20. Longer, if you count the backyard play I put together in second grade with the friends on my cul-de-sac on Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. I still remember one of the parental reviews for it. I think they said something like, it was less a play and more just play. Over the years, I've directed casts sizing from 1 to 50, actors from ages 4 to 90. I've staged on thrust, proscenium, arena, and transverse stages. I've directed plays, musicals, plays with music, movement pieces, puppetry, and immersive theater. I've worked with production budgets as small as $0 and as large as $35,000, and the vast majority of my work has been self-produced. I've started 3 different theater companies, including the first ever professional theater company in Bryan College Station, Texas, and most recently the first theater company dedicated entirely to speculative fiction in Houston, Texas. And I've advised multiple other artists as they've started their own companies. Now, despite all of this, I am still learning and growing with each project I produce and direct, and I'm excited for this project in part because it's forced me to carefully consider every facet of my directing experience to share what I have learned with you. But perhaps the most important thing that I want you to know about me is that I am in love with the field of directing. There's really only one place I'm happier than in a rehearsal room working on a production, and that's cuddling with my husband. As any of my friends or family will tell you, when I love someone, I want to do everything in my power to help them become the best version of themselves they can. You know, for the last 20 years, I've been told over and over again by my artistic collaborators that I'm unlike any other director they've ever known or worked with. And for most of that time, I've brushed that off as kind flattery. But as I've worked with more and more people who have said the same thing, I've started to ask them why. And the answers I got surprised me because they weren't about artistic genius, but about much more basic things. Kindness, leadership, mentorship, communication. So I began to ask about their experience with other directors in other rehearsal and production rooms, trying to understand why what I honestly thought were the basics were so often missing. And I realized that the field of directing itself is broken. There is no clear path to becoming a director in the American theater world. Even going to college for theater isn't a clear path. Getting an MFA might be, but MFA directing programs are incredibly hard to get into and usually require a significant sacrifice of finances, time, or both. which means that most directors are self-taught, learning from experience and observation, or more often, learning on the job. Rehearsals are almost always closed processes, so directors don't get peer feedback very often, and when we do, we don't often know how to handle it, especially when it's critical. We very rarely get to share notes or lessons learned with other directors unless we are in each other's shows, and there's rarely effective mentorship or guidance for new directors because we ourselves weren't mentored, so we don't know how to mentor. Because of the power differential in a production, our collaborators are often uncomfortable giving us feedback, because we are the gatekeepers of whether they get to do the work they love again. And if they do, we might react emotionally because there's so much pressure on the director to manage every aspect of a production, effectively ensuring that they won't feel comfortable to say anything again. Now, it is my firm belief that the vast majority of directors are good, kind people who want the best for our teams and our work. We are also placed under immense, often unrealistic expectations, both from ourselves and from others. And we can all benefit from an examination of what we do and how and why we do it. Which brings us to deconstructing directing. Let me break down the plans so far. I've assembled a starting list of broad topic areas that I'll be calling acts, which will each hold a specific number of scenes. Now, scenes, which in other places might be called lessons, but that felt too unilateral for me, will have video content with captions, an audio-only file, and an associated transcript of the content so that you can engage with it however is most effective for you. I'll also include relevant links to other resources and worksheets that you can print or use digitally to guide your own work. To start, most of the video content will be like this, with me talking to the camera, but eventually I hope to be able to film actual in-the-room examples of these principles in action, whether in rehearsal or production. It's just going to take a lot more resources and some conversations with willing playwrights about licensing their words for a permanent video collection like this. Act 1 is called Defining Directing, and the 6 scenes within it have launched with this announcement/intro video, so you can dive into those immediately. Act 1 is all about how we understand the role of a director in a theatrical process, something we just don't spend enough time talking about. In those 6 scenes, I'll share how I've come to understand the role of a director over the 20 years I've been directing, and give you some tools to carefully consider how you define your own role as a director. Act 2 will be called Developing Our Directing Identity, and will focus on even more intangible questions about how to develop and identify our artistic taste and preferences, how we match process to project, and how we continue our personal growth while in a position of leadership. Act 3 is currently titled Text, Playwrights, and Dramaturgy, and will break down a few popular text analysis methods, look at why text analysis can be so valuable, and also when we may get too in the weeds with it, and explore the relationship of a director with a playwright and/or dramaturg. Of course, text isn't always present in theater, or if it is, it isn't always the starting point, but in Western theater, it's the most common starting point, so we'll start there. Additional acts are still in development, but will include topics like understanding power and intersectionality, working with intimacy and fight choreographers, designing and running auditions and callbacks, rehearsal and production schedule design, running effective rehearsals, the dreaded director's note, working with actors, working with designers and technicians, working with producers, and more. If you have suggestions for other topics not listed here, please feel free to drop them in the comments or shoot us an email. I firmly believe that we cannot grow as a field as long as knowledge and training resources like this are behind paywalls, which includes access to collegiate and graduate education. So, I am placing all of Deconstructing Directing under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike license. Now, this long phrase means that you are welcome to take the material that is here and use it or adapt it freely, as long as you, A, attribute it to the original author, B, do not use it for commercial purposes, meaning you can't sell it or anything derived from it. And C, you have to give others permission to adapt your adaptation under the same restrictions. Now, you can read more about it at the link below. Directing and supporting other directors is my passion, and I hope to continue adding to this resource library for as long as I'm alive. And a Creative Commons license will help ensure that the gates stay open. But it takes time and resources to develop this content. And while I'm queer, non-binary, and neurodivergent, I'm also white, assigned male at birth, and middle class. So I don't want my voice to be the only one that lives in this library. My dream is to be able to invite other incredible directors and storytellers to add their own perspectives and teaching to this library. But we, as folks that will benefit from their lived experience, need to be able to pay them for that work. It's always so hard to talk about money without triggering feelings of guilt, so I want to be very clear in saying that if you do not have the capacity to support this work financially, that is okay. Please take it, apply it, be inspired by it with no judgment or guilt whatsoever. If you do have the capacity to support it financially and see the value in what this can become, I've set up a Patreon where you can contribute once or set up a recurring contribution. And I've included some perks like stickers and a monthly online Zoom hangout and Q&A session to help make your investment feel even more worthwhile. The link to that is below as well. So, that's it. I can't even tell you how excited I am. This has been years in the making, and I am delighted to finally launch it. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Let's transform this field together as we deconstruct directing.